it before, but just to kind of reiterate it, normally the way demand comes into existence is through the contribution to supply. People work. They help produce goods. They help provide services. In exchange, they earn money. Now they earn money and they can spend that money on the goods and services that they helped produce or provide. They don't have to buy the identical goods and services. They're just buying some. They helped fill up this bag of goods and services with some goods and services, and they reached into the bag and they grabbed something. It might not have been what they put in, but they put in something, and now they're taking out something. Somebody else may pull out what they put in. But if you're talking about a bunch of people just sitting at home, doing no work whatsoever, contributing nothing into that bag of goods and services, and then the government sends them a check, in fact, sends them an even bigger check than what they were earning when they were helping to produce goods and services. And now they take their hand and they reach into that bag to pull out goods and services and they put nothing in. Obviously, there's not going to be enough stuff in that bag, especially when you have millions of hands that put nothing into the bag, reaching in to grab something. And so the only thing that can happen is that prices go up. That's how the market adjusts. When you have all this new demand, but no increase in supply, you have to ration the supply with a higher price. If everybody who was buying stuff was also producing stuff, that wouldn't be a problem. Now, of course, Americans are used to buying stuff without producing it because we have these huge trade deficits. And so normally it's no problem. We just print up a bunch of money and then we buy what foreigners produce. Except foreigners had COVID too. Foreigners weren't producing as much because they were at home under quarantine. They were under lockdown. So the ability of foreign producers to supply Americans with the goods that we don't produce is diminished. Now, that would be fine if we didn't have all this money that we were printing to buy it with, but the Fed is printing up all this money to buy stuff that foreigners didn't even make. So what do? We're bidding up the price of what they did make. And of course, not only is the price of producing all that stuff going way up, the price of shipping it all in here has gone way up because our government has printed so much money. We've printed more money than governments, let's say, in other countries. So Americans are going on this global shopping spree. We want to buy a lot more stuff than other people. Well, if the factories are in Asia, but all the spending is in America, well, you got to ship that stuff over to America. So there's more things that they want to export so Americans can buy them, and that is straining the capacity of the entire shipping industry. We don't have the capacity. We don't have the containers. But the problem isn't a shortage of containers and shipping capacity. The problem is we have too much money. I mean, you're never going to have an unlimited amount of stuff. That's why the emphasis on growing an economy has to be on increasing production. By capital investment and savings and other consumption, you can have more stuff. You can't just focus on demand. You can't just print money and give it to people and then be surprised when there's nothing to buy because they didn't make anything. I mean, if it was that easy, if all you had to do is print money, then Zimbabwe would have been a smashing success story because they certainly had no problem printing trillions and handing it out to the people. The problem was they were printing a lot of money, but the people weren't producing a lot of stuff, so there was nothing for the money to buy. But of course, Mugabe could have simply blamed all the problems in Zimbabwe on supply shortages. Hey, the problem is we don't have enough stuff. We have these widespread supply shortages. Of course, right? What else would you expect when you're printing all this money? And what else would you expect in America? Except so many people who are writing these articles. And as I pointed out in my last podcast, even in the beige book, when you have these regional Fed banks noticing all of these supply shortages and talking about them as problematic, but also pointing to them as proof that the inflation is transitory, not a one of these regional banks is pointing a finger at money supply. Nobody even mentions money supply. We have a record increase in the money supply, and nobody wants to say that that is in any way responsible for these big increases in prices, even though guys like Milton Friedman got famous for saying inflation is everywhere and anywhere a monetary phenomenon, which of course by definition it is. And if you have an old enough dictionary, that is exactly the way the word inflation is defined. So how you can write about a huge inflation problem and completely overlook the elephant in the living room, meaning all the inflation, all the money supply that's being printed, obviously you're not going to put your finger on the real cause, which of course is not what the government wants to do. The Federal Reserve and the government don't want to accept responsibility for inflation. They don't want to talk about inflation being an expansion of the money supply, because then it's obvious who's causing it, because it's the Fed that's expanding the money supply. But when they're trying to blame it on supply shortages, when